Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous tous d'être là ce soir pour cette conférence d'AFF qui nous font plaisir d'être là avec nous ce soir. Donc ce soir, la conférence, elle sera présentée présentation à deux têtes. D'un côté, Martin Fröhlich, de l'agence AFF Partner et aussi enseignant à l'EPFL, et de Robert Zeimer, partenaire aussi au sein de l'agence AFF. Donc c'est une agence qui vient de Berlin, qui s'est déplacée pour deux événements. Une première est une conférence ici ce soir à l'école d'architecture, qui sera suivie par un vernissage dans une galerie au 17 rue de Rossheim à Strasbourg, à laquelle vous êtes tous invités à participer, et une exposition qui durera au moins 2 semaines à partir de ce soir. Donc on est très content de les accueillir et je vais les laisser eux-mêmes développer les thématiques qu'ils ont choisies pour cette conférence ce soir. And everything will be in English, but everybody knows it already.
Merci. Mais c'est aussi une question pour vous. Tu fais le temps de la conférence en allemand ou anglais? Mais nous sommes 2 kilomètres en face de l'allemand. Peut-être c'est mieux pour vous pour écouter une conférence en allemand ou anglais. You want in English? Okay. Bon. So in German. So we can do it a little bit like Umberto Eco, like this guy who spoke 5 languages in one sentence. Anyway, usually first thanks for the invitation, of course, and I hope we will have a nice evening together. Usually when we are invited for such lectures and they're more related to schools, we're thinking more about that. We have to stress you first a little bit with theory, and then we can maybe talk about our projects. So there's a period when you can also raise up the hands and you can stop. So we have some projects, and then on the end you can also say, okay, now it's enough, maybe the brain is filled up. To talk about, let's say, our practice, it's a little bit this, that we also, like, when we left the school, the first, let's say, contact with a client, that's completely weird, because the client wants to teach you that he has the money, can influence you, and finally, everything what we learned in school is quite not necessary on the end. So there's this little bit, but not to break down, a little bit to help you to get a, let's say, perspective for that. Let's talk about a little bit about principles. So in the beginning, we think that architecture is a kind of communication. Everybody knows this image, which is a failed communication in architecture, because the people try to build up something, and then nobody knows on the end what they talk. And there's a positive thing about communication. Everybody knows that. Maybe it was not a cell phone, but it was telephone between the communists and or between Russia and Washington D.C. That it was the last call before they sent up the atomic weapons. So this is also a kind of image that communication is quite an important thing. So why communication? Because we're thinking when we start to enter in a discussion with a client, is that we have a kind of dream or imagination. We say of us, we're codifying something. So we say, okay, I have a dream, and I send this message to my client, and listen to that, and then the client starts to decodify this message. No? And interesting is that the decodifying of this word, like in the sense of linguistic way, is that the decodifying is sometimes very different. For instance, let's say in architecture we say, I have a house, I send this to my client, and the client starts to decodify what is a house. Especially on another way, when the client comes to us with the idea of a house, it's like a dream, and they try to implement this kind of dream to us as an architect. So this kind of communication is quite important, and especially what we learned in the last years or so in this kind of, let's say, international mixed up culture, there are also a huge difference in let's say, words and perception of that. And you can do this really quite easy, because you can go to Google image research, And you can start up really, if you have ideas of something, you type them in different languages. No? A little bit, you can say Schloss, Castle, Castello, or Chateau. And then you get up the different results a little bit. So we can also say that kind of Google image research is a little bit, please prefer you have to clean up your backup cache, because they're also tracking you, what you're looking for. Then you get a little bit also a similarity of the different worlds and the perception of architecture that's behind. The most exciting results we got if we talk with human relationships, like Frau, Donna, and Femme. Before it's the same word for a person, but when you go through these different cultures, so this is a German perception of a woman. That's the Italian one, and then we have the French one. And you see they are quite different. No, that's not the same. If you say house, a house is something, a wife, it's also different. And then maybe we feel a little bit confident. We say, okay, maybe it was the wrong word, and we go back to English, and they say wife, maybe there's another word, woman, madame or madame. And then you also do that in the same way. You say, okay, wife, okay, yeah, that is somebody related to somebody, and a woman, this we had before. And then, okay, maybe it was madame. No, also not that, but madame could be. So this is interesting if you start, it explains with this thing when you start about to visualize an idea, that you have to be very precise and to find out the right words and to find out which kind of communication you want to go. So this is in between us as colleagues, also when you work together, and let's say as with friends, you do a competition. Sometimes you speak 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks about 2 different things, but nobody feels or comes with that out. So the second thing is, which helps a little bit in this description, is this kind of imagination. That what it was shown before, when you send a message to somebody, he has a kind of imagination of something. And that's quite interesting, that the book you have to read. It's an interesting philosopher, Willem Flusser. He died in the 70s with a car accident, Czechoslovakian philosopher which traveled around the world everywhere. And he was really long material. He had, I don't know, 10 languages or 5 or 6 languages. It was the kind of his own. And he wrote a book about design strategies also, and media theory a lot. And there's one description of him when he describes our kind, how we are doing design in this manner. So the description is that you can close your eyes and you are making a nice walk through the forest. And you're hearing the birds, the sun is shining, you're seeing the shadow, it smells beautiful. And then you go, I know, 10 hours, you're a little bit totally tired, and then you say, okay, I go back home very fast. And then you get the idea that maybe I will find a stick for that. No? To go home with a stick, you know that from your grandfather, when you get tired, he had this kind of stick, and the walk was much more easier. And from that moment, the forest changed completely in his meaning, the way of the perception. You don't listen to the birds, you don't see and smell. You try to see in each stick or each part of trees a kind of stick. And so this is the kind of what he might think that the kind of design strategy also could be. So you start to make a kind of projection. What is your image of a stick to each piece of nature? And which is today quite different maybe to your grandfather once. He was not growing up with the internet. He had only that one, which was related to a small village. But we are full of this myriad variations of stick. No? And that means also the kind of perception, what we mean, what is, and what we project or something, it has a kind of influence in the design strategy. The next one maybe is a question of the expression. It's another book you have to read, or to say it's from Architecture with Architects from Rudowski, which was also an important exposition at MoMA in '69. It helps a little bit also to confront you that also architecture is rising up without our profession. And we very often like to look to them and to find ideas to follow up with them. And this guy, he separates the different ways to do architecture and explains us quite very well how they're rising up. He said that we have a kind of elementary architecture, which means it's an architecture which is earthly and locally significant of the material, because that's the stone you found inside. They have a simple and easy way to make constructions, so the material also gives the way how you have to construct them, because that's a form of material. And they have usually a social and cultural functionality, so usually the people build only that things what they need. So this is one part, which is very local, the first step. The second is you push them in the established architecture. That is use all the sameness of the Valaisan houses. They say it's specific characteristic of the landscape and of his historic evolution. So there's all knowledge of that region is really inscribed in that kind of architecture. So it's really slowly developed year by year and period of period. So the father gave everything to the son to the next, and something like this. And so they have a traditional construction types as constructive ways and to meet basic demands. So there's this house a very nice example to draw the cornet adaptly and utilization naturally inside and outside. So they have this both ways to use that. And this is a way a little bit like what we really like also to discuss between us in designing processes, because this is a question of let's say evaluating design solutions. So we ask us very often how they did it before the other ones and how we can implement this in the design process, to learn from other ones a little bit, this message in it. And then he makes the last chapter, which he calls Expressive Architecture. And this is a little bit standing for the most of the architecture which gets developed today. Like, let's go to a train station here in Strasbourg, maybe also like this. They have the intuitive use of material and construction. Symbolic character in proportion as well as the scale. And the connection of structural and spatial shape, it's completely different. So the Mendelssohn Tower could be also in that theory, and the little bit exists. So that is finally the thing today, because it has no relation to kind of genius loci. And it's a kind of this free transport of material, free transport of form, free transport of knowledge. And this tower can be sent everywhere. And so the main question is, and this is also another nice exercise, architectural stereotypes. If you look at competitions on the internet, these are the stereotypes of architecture which get produced usually in the press, and also when people expect in project or in competition, they usually request it like that. There are some colleagues that try to escape of that. They have a special way to do it, and this is usually the China's render market, it's influenced of that, and the world is built up of this. So usually this is, let's say, 90% of architecture in the way of square meters gets produced. And this is a situation in which you will enter when you will leave the school. And now it would be nice to find out strategies how you can, let's say, develop the own kind of perception of architecture, and own kind of communication and the way you start to design things. And finally also we have to think about how you can start to explain your architecture to a kind of client. Because usually the clients there are 90% of the client there are not architects. They're, okay, it's only in the juries, but also there the jury is 50% of non-educated person. And the question is which kind of language you will find. It's just very simple. You say, okay, I have a train station and make a rail in front, and I'm like Jonas, and we all go in, so that's another story, and they will like it, maybe. So the question would be every time for you, which story is behind? So what is also that book, and how you can feel comfortable with this. And we will go a little bit through some projects, a little bit to explain how we try to, let's say, to escape of this architectonic stereotypes, and to develop with each project a little bit their own kind of let's say, way to discover the world or profession. And for that, Robert will guide you through the projects. So,
thank you. Hello. What I just want to add is that if we, it's also us, it's Martin and I, we are coming to speak about our architecture to you together. So we also have to communicate. We are communicating on this presentation as well, and we always need actually stories and logics to understand each other and to basically make decisions, also design decisions. And the first one is a very small project. It's in Magdeburg, it's in East Germany, and it's also a very personal story behind the project, because it's actually very close. This is the location of the project. You see artificial lakes, basically. So this is like man-made lakes and man-made channels, and you're looking on a picture, and it's looks like nature, but it's actually culture that you're looking at, and the white spot basically describes the position of the project, and this is the place where Martin and Sven, the original partners of the office, grew up. And the client had in mind something like this. This was one of the very, very first projects. They wanted to have like a sanitary facility for a camping place, basically. And this is what basically this facility looked like. And this is probably what he had in mind. And what we had in mind in the picture was actually everything that is happening on the channels, basically. So it's about container ships, it's the Elbe Canal, which is a channel which connects the Elbe to the Oder. And so there's this transportation of containers, so we thought maybe containers could be an issue. Then it's also the childhood played an important role. And also the former industrial productions and industrial factories, basically, that you can find in Magdeburg, that play an important role as well with their, pre-war industrial production. So all these images played a role for us and started a defined project, which is actually in the ground plan looking like a Lego game. It's actually a stacking game of containers, and the content is still actually simply like for the boys and for the girls and for the men and for the women the sanitary facilities, but still it's something more than that. So it's actually a game of adding elements to an industrial stereotype container and to define a shape that basically sticks in mind, and it is something that you remember. There's also a process behind it. It's a process of production, so it's stacked easily. All these containers came pre-fitted with the sanitary elements, and the only thing that was added to it was these roof lights, basically, because there's always the issue of vapor and odors in these sanitary facilities that have to somehow get out of the building, and mostly the windows and ventilations are too small. But these are quite large roof lights and some kind of small entrance. So it's also a question of privacy. How do you enter even this kind of small house? And you want to enter by an entrance and not only by a door. So this was one of the very first projects of us. Right now it's like 12 years ago or 30 years ago. And also in this very early projects, there's a focus on detail and on things that basically work together with the environment. So basically this camping site is for kids. So it's also like a kiddie language of elements and things. And then there's also elements that you can find here in the building, like these lights, for example. We discovered them for this project. So let's go to something else, something more, say, historical, traditional, something which has another significance actually. It's the Lutherstadt Eisleben. There's the baptism church of Martin Luther. It's called St. Petri, and we have been asked to do a project on the St. Peter's church. So this is Eisleben. The postcard of Eisleben. It's always a very good idea to collect postcards from places, and we also display some of these postcards in our exhibition tonight. It gives a very somehow childish, but also somehow unique idea of what the place looks like and what is important to the place. And so this is Eisleben, and the church to the right is the St. Peter Church, and you see these hills and everything around it. It's a very nice but very agricultural countryside actually. This is the first meeting with the client, as we talked about meeting the client, talking to the client. This is the clients. not very stylish clients actually, and they explained us about the baptism and what elements would have to stay in their place and which elements could probably be moved or changed, and it brought up all the whole issue of baptism and what they had in mind actually, and which was actually really the task of this intervention was to design a baptism center. But baptism in a very, very large way, so in a very historical way as well. So it's about baptizing somebody like with the whole body, and to go into the water and feel the River Jordan basically, and a very American way of baptizing. And we didn't really understand in the first moments how this could work together with this church actually. I mean, this was the church. The church was beautiful and it was already renovated inside. The only thing that kind of irritated the image was the floor and the chairs that have been like somehow out of place and a little bit annoying, but the rest of the church was very beautiful. And the question was how to integrate something like a baptizing center into this church. The background is for the client that in Germany there's a lot of churches which have problems in order that they don't have enough people to go to the church and to come to the messe. So they're mostly empty, and so they're really eager to find ways to use the churches or to find a new meaning to these churches, and that's why these ideas like baptizing center come up and become a project for us. So what we did first was to build a model of the elements we could work with. And so this is a model of the so it's like a section of the building and 1 meter height, basically, Guam Plan section. And you see the basic structure with the columns and the walls. Everything is totally listed and untouchable, basically. And we decided to integrate one element only. I think you cannot really see it on the beamer projection. It's a concrete slab, which is taking over a lot of new functions in this building. So it clarifies the entrance, because today an entrance in a church or in any public building cannot be with a step or a stair. There has to be some ramping, some access for all idea behind it. And this concrete slab also integrates heat, so there's a heating system inside it to heat the place, and it also integrates in a way the baptizing. What is important to this element is that it is totally readable. You see it; it's everywhere. It's never touching the existing architectural elements, and it's respecting the historical elements as well. And it has an own identity, and the identity comes for us. We projected the identity into this element. I mean, we could have also done just a concrete slab with a certain Rauheit, with a certain roughness, that you don't slip on it. But we decided that there has to be something else to it because it's important to the place. So we have been searching for things to help us to explain it to us and to others what to do with this concrete slab. So we thought about these farming elements, water drops, and so on and so on. And finally, it made us come up with the idea of a pattern being first projected and then engraved into this concrete slab. So we designed actually this. This is the final result of the project. In the foreground, you see this baptizing center, a miniature of it, basically. And other participants to the competition, they proposed a building next door, like an addition to the church, and a lot of elements. But we said, okay, it's only this 1.50 meter circle in the ground, And it actually, when you thought about the way to how this graphically works together, like this, where's the animation? Yes. They see this has been very important in order to define a certain graphics to it, that to define the place of this pool, basically. And it's just right in there because all these circles and lines helped us a lot to define the right place to it. So what is interesting to us always, as we are kind of obsessed with tools and things to do, what was important was to find out a way to make this engravement, actually. Because it's just, it's not, you cannot just write a paper to a firm and say, okay, we want to have this pattern on the ground, please do it. Because nobody knows in the first place how to do it. There's no photographic, photo concrete thing or something that helps you there. So in quite close coordination and communication with the contractors, we found out a way to apply these graphics to the ground. So basically we find mid spots as we do it up. This guy drew it up into the ground, and it was quite interesting. So this is the final result of it. And it sort of blends into the surrounding, but it's something quite unique and quite special. So just quickly some pictures of it. Okay, so second element in the place is furniture, because the furniture was like, and we also thought that the furniture, of course you can always pick up a catalog and find a bench. There's 100,000 benches that you can choose from, but you can also try to tell a story with the bench. And of course with Martin Luther, it's a little bit different, because I mean there's this story about Luther with his ideas of planting a tree. Even if there's only one day left, you would always plant a tree, and there's this connection to trees and to wood and so on. So we thought that taking a closer look to the wood would be important for this design, and we selected a lot of different woods from this region. It's a farming region, and they grow all kinds of trees, apple trees, plum trees, cherry trees, whatever. You buy a lot of these fruits in Berlin as well. When you buy fruits, they mostly come from there. So we said it would be interesting to build a bench from to do one design for a bench, a design that works without nails and without screws. It's just like stacking and basically a handcrafted connection of the parts of it with different woods. And in the end, for us, of course, it was interesting as well to see how the different woods work. Like some woods are easier to handle, some are not so easy. But in the end, there's benches from all kinds of these woods. And so when you enter the church, you also can choose what kind of wood and also what kind of tree you're sitting on. So this is this is what we mean a little bit by this kind of storytelling. And when you do something, you always tell a story, and people sometimes also understand the story. Second project type and project line is not churches, but it would be also nice to build a lot of churches. It's schools. Yeah, in Berlin, we build a lot of schools at the moment, and these are iconographic pictures of two, or like of ground plans of two schools, and they're kind of same but different. But what we want to explain right now is that even if it's just like a same ground plan, it can be very different school. Tonight at the gallery, you will also see a selection of tools, and I don't know. I mean, I think everybody knows that these are tools for the velo tools, and basically they contain all of these tools, or most of these tools contain the same function and the same sizes of screws they fit to. But when you take a look at the variation of these bike tools, and there's also modern bike tools that are smaller and so on, and they fold and so on. This is older ones, but still, there's a variety, and there's some kind of significance to all of them. And there's a reason why somebody made a choice in all of these tools. And it's not only a marketing choice, it's kind of like somebody thought about it and then he made a choice. So some are more handy, and sometimes the diameters, some diameters are closer to each other, so it's easier, you don't have to change the hand and so on. And they all have a logic, and if you think about it, you can see a lot of things in them. But you can also just use them, of course. This is the ground plan of the city of Berlin before the Second World War, or one part of it. It's just, what you see is blocks. It's a Hauptrichtplan. This is like it was a very large extension of the city by the end of the 19th century, and the basic element of these extensions have been basically blocks, and the blocks contain courtyards usually, and the plan is nice because it shows in black the public buildings, and in yellow the apartment buildings basically. And what is black and yellow in the plan is also identifiable in materials in the historic city. So in the historic city or in Berlin, all the usual apartment buildings, they are made with plastered walls, so they are painted, and they have no identifiable material actually. It's not like in Paris or here sometimes, in many times, or many places in Strasbourg, you have sandstone apartment buildings. In Berlin, it's not like this. So most of these buildings are just plastered. And then the public buildings, walk through the city and you see, or at this time you walk through the city and everything was public, churches, schools, they've made in bricks and the rest in plaster. So after the war, the same place looked like this. I mean, it's only an aerial view, but everybody knows Google Maps, and so I think you can see something. It's the situation in the 90s. It's totally fragmented. There has been a lot of destruction. There's some of these blocks left, and they have been basically repaired in the last 20 years. But then you see all these fragments. And some of them have been added in the 60s and the 70s, but some of them are just by accident fragments in the city space, and from a school which was part of a block, which was supposed to be part of the block, which only had one facade basically and a curtain facade, all of a sudden became an object, like an objet trouvé with different angles and edges and so on, and our task was to add a building to it, to a larger campus basically. So the building in the north is the addition, and we had to basically play a new game in the city at this time. So we had to play with objects and not with facades. So the same thing happened in another place, and this is the two schools, and I will present them basically in parallel. It's the same. It's the same thing, a little bit on another situation in Berlin, but you have still the former block school there, which is now an age, like an object in the city space, and then there's all these fragmented, sometimes widely grown elements around it. So the question is, you're dealing with this kind of things. You're dealing with forms. Sometimes they are accidental, sometimes they are not accidental, but they exist, and they can inspire you also as well. You can find a lot of things in these twisted and changed and modified, destroyed, rebuilt buildings, and also our new buildings that we have been adding, also objects, have the same kind of language in a way. So there's also these tilted roofs, there's some overlapping, some overhangings, and even when you show this picture or this picture here, basically it's everything, all the decisions that we make, they have to make sense, but also they make an object. The Guam Plan is the same type of building. It's a building which is wrapping around a courtyard. So the courtyard can have very different qualities. It can just these schools are both for primary schools for small kids. So there's also a way of protecting and containing something. So this is like a contained playground basically. But a courtyard in a school setting can also be an entrance. So what is remarkable about these schools is that they have the same ground plan, but they have very different elements inside. So this is, for example, a corridor, a school corridor, which has been expanded in order to contain new functions like playing places and all these lockers. And actually, when it's bad weather, they can also have their school bag in there. But the corridor can also look like this. A little bit more serré, as you say here, like smaller and compact. And the elements are not freestanding, but they're attached to the walls. But you can play around with these elements in a very characteristic way. So this is... we just show these images to give an idea how much like surfaces and materiality can influence a place. What is important is that it's still kind of an understandable and credible choice that you've made. So one of these schools has an atrium, and we worked a lot on the idea how this atrium could work, what function it has. This atrium has 2 staircases, like 2 stair wings going down and meeting on one basic point on the ground. So this is very important to us, and it influences the design very strongly. And then there's also the question of identity, like who looks at this building? What is the difference between a school and if you go to a school corridor today, in many schools, it's only the color that tells you that you're in a school. Everything else could also be just some kind of office surface, basically, or some administration building. You're walking down corridors, and there's plates on the walls identifying a room and so on. So we had also we think that all architects have the task to relate to this idea of how people and how kids, for example, here understand the places. It can be color, it can be also any kind of codifying the place, but there has to be a code in order to stick in mind. The last feature of these schools that's important is texture. The texture, the skin of the building can be very. The choice of the texture can be very, very random in a way. And I think when we went into the city of Strasbourg, we saw some of these random choices, not all of them, but some. And the question is, how can you make a choice less random? In one building it was quite clear, this is the story I told you before, that the existing building was a brick building, and we thought about, and it has a very strong quality as a brick building, and we worked with the brick in the new building, so we played with depth and texture, and we played with the idea of breaking through to punch holes into the texture, and this is one way to work with it, and it gives a very unique and identifiable facade, which also can be quite clearly related to the historic facade of the old building. Or it can relate to something else. Like here, for example, in the other school, it was an element in objet, which is important in the interior of the building. It's this curtain that basically shuts the garderobe, and this curtain has been used in different ways in this building. It has been used as a curtain. This is a Swedish snow military thing, basically, that they use in Sweden, and but you can also use it as a shablon. basically to put texture on a building. So in this case, this is also the same scale of the images of the bricks. So this is what we basically apply to the building, and the effect in the end is some kind of camouflage effect. Camouflage in a very wild and very random urban situation, but it's also something which is unique and in a way also functional, because there's a lot of graffiti going on in this area, but as we already prepared a very strong graffiti, there has been no graffiti on the school yet, so it is kind of like it is already coded, and this is important. Do you have energy for more projects? Or okay, Martin, do you want to go on?
Of course.
Yes.
It's good to switch in the voice maybe, and it's not so boring. Yeah. So there in this presented project, there's also this kind of discussion. Now the first, like this small one, which was more referring to Lego, it was when we presented to the client. So we came up with a small rendering and we presented to him, and he said, "Oof." So he was out of communication. He said, I never saw this thing before, but he remembered a little bit in this kind, because there was this kind of Lego before maybe, and then he said, "Just do it." And then we had 3 months time to build it up. So this was the first, let's say, way to do it. And also the children finally, they accept. So when we built them up, it was the same way the children, they thought communicate the project. For them it was Lego on the end. Like that one. Or for instance the church, when we did this, we said to the client, "No, we will not do chairs like you had before. We want to do benches, because a bench is every time a thing, two people have to sit together, and this is the main opinion of, let's say, of a church, what we think, to bring people together and to share it." So that was, and the wood was also to explain. When we said the wood, the churches they have today this problem that only in Christmas they are full. The rest of the year they are totally empty. Nobody goes there. And you said, okay, and every chair or bench is standing for different personalities. And in case that only one people sitting there, they have still different mentalities in the room with this different kind of wood. So there were a lot of, let's say, layers to speak about this kind of perception of projects, which is also quite interesting. And this makes a little bit also like kind of fun or passion to keep it in the project finally, or later in your profession. Because finally, designing this kind of architecture, you have to ask your teachers. It's usually in practice, it's 10%. The rest, you have to make Excel sheets, you have to look for details, you have to solve details, to look for the cheapest material and so on. So quite you have to find a strategy how to keep that feeling to be passionate in the profession. So usually our professors, they say to us there are two kinds of architects. So there are successful architects, so they earn a lot of money, and maybe there are good architects. They are not looking to money, they are passionate in the profession. So when you leave the school, just make the choice before, I would say. So the next project maybe was also a project really quite of passion what we did. It was after a huge restoration of a castle what we had to do, and then we were proud to fit back in a very small scale again. And it was also nearby in the high altitude of the middle of Germany. So it was a mountain which is 1,240 meters. So every time the Swiss guys, they're laughing about that. So it was like in the nowhere. There was a hotel around and this nice postcard about the mountains, what you can see up there. And we had the opportunity with a client which bought this nice building, black, let's say, totally stupid stereotype of architecture. It was a prefabricated house for holidays, which was usually produced in this prefabrication, usually for low altitudes and the sea with more sun, and it was placed on this, let's say, high altitude, and geographic influence was quite hard to them. So usually the building had no value because it was possible to repair it in a certain way, but also the main point was the building was outstanding outside of a village. And in Germany you have this law: if something is in the fields, you have no right to build again or new. You can only adapt 10% of the volume of the building. If the building gets demolished or cannot resist under weather conditions, you will lose the permission to build that building there. So we had to find a strategy for that. We said, okay, we will keep it in a certain way. It's not a good building, but it could be maybe. And then we had a speech about what you want, why you want to have this building, and for what you want to have it. And then there were small sketches that we said, okay, the building usually it's something like it's abandoned, but it's a place somewhere in the forest. And usually it's like that when you're in a village and you see all the young people sitting on the bus station waiting that the bus is coming, doing, I don't know, playing on cell phones and listening to music, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, and waiting of the dream of the town. And the client was a client from the town. So there was this image, which is a most well-known bus stop in Germany. This is a bus stop where the guys from Tokyo Hotel lived in a small village, and they went every time or every week to Magdeburg in the city center, and they're also it's like the grave of Jim Morris in Paris, where also are engraving there, the groupies are going there. So we said, okay, it's something like a bus stop, a bus station which transport this hope into the city, but you are on the opposite. No, you are coming out of the town, and maybe you're waiting for the nature. You want to see the nature, and you just turn 180 degrees. And so this was a little bit the story when we started to talk about, to find out the way. The second was usually the place was to go in the winter, which means go for randonnée and just walking on the snow. And this is this perception usually of nature when we go there, and everybody goes there. We are most impressed by the possibility to read all the traces, animals you see, and you try to discover things which we usually not attend when we are walking inside of a town. And so traces, it could be still a story in the discussion. And of course we have this kind of traces we know as reference from art or also from natural catastrophes, tsunamis, this kind of traces. So we thought maybe we can develop the project out of it. So we add 10% of the volume to it, and we solve the sanitary facility because it was just a place to stock material. And we add the 10%. And we open the whole house in the direction of the forest, which is the dream of the client to see the green, and open the window there. And then just we're still working every time a little bit on this question, what is reusable and what we can integrate in the project. So we said, okay, maybe we can convince also the administration that we said we keep the building in a certain way, but it was not written how you have to keep it in the sense. And we said, okay, we use it like a scaffolding and a framework. And find an enterprise who goes with us this, let's say, way, which is usually also difficult to describe in the contractor, to say just use the house as a framework, and you say, no, it doesn't work, the beton will flow everywhere. And they say, yeah, come on, I change the windows for you, we put on some metal sheets, and we will help you a little bit of this. So it was this passion of practice, and finally they went forward with this experience with us. So we used the house as a framework, and put the walls in between, and finally all the concrete, and the house was like an imprint of that. So finally we kept the idea of the permission that we have to keep the place on one way, and the second way also we find this pureness in this kind of traces and this cold environment and so on. And then we had long discussion with our building physics, let's say, linked friends. We said, really, we need isolation for that? And they said, come on, that's a house for vacation, you go, how often you go? And then there was a calculation, okay, 10 times a year. Okay, 10 times a year, that means just make a huge fire inside, and then it will be warm. And then when you leave, forget that maybe. So it's maybe a hard place to educate also what is coldness. And well, you will see it soon. So we did this, so the imprints were very nice, and then we had the discussion about how we order the elements inside. And again, we had this discussion internally where we put the things. So there are this reference like pamphlet of architecture, this nice collection of the houses referring to the European farmer's house, and there's every time this relationship between fire, animals and humans. So the farmer, they very often use the animals also to heat the house, and there was also the central place of fire. And then you know also this reference here, which is also a very iconic one, because this form arrived with the invention of the oven. When the European went up in the north to the Inuit, and they were bringing up this oven, they started to build also the house around this kind of form. So it was a form of the heating system. So that's why it was quite clear. We said, okay, the fire has to be in the middle, and that's the place where we meet us. And as much as far from the fire, it will be colder. So you have 100 degree on the oven or 200, and you have minus 10 on the wall maybe. So that was a little bit, everything was theory on the beginning. We did these nice drawings and we said, okay, if you want to sleep, okay, everybody's equipped like that, you can survive with that. And then it's really like this, if you go there, you need a kind of cooperative hand-to-hand work. And there's really that oven, which we found in manufacturings of Swiss steel workers. They still do that for the mountain huts. And there's every time a thing when the people go there, and it's quite amazing that there starts really a discussion about what we need really and what is not necessary to have. And so, for instance, if you go there and you eat, you have to clean your table. You cannot left something on the table because you have a problem of waste, you have no water to clean it, and so there's also these things arrived in this discussion. And then the people are sitting very close, they need more warm thing, and when you sleep really like that, you know, like cocoons and everything closed, because the wall really, you have also this impression, you see these eye flowers like you have in the fairy tales or in the grandmother stories. And then there was another discussion what we had to have. There was, okay, how we create the interior for that building. And this, again, you have two choices. You have the first one, which is, again, like in the theory we described, you can work with the material which is there. So it means you can use wood, you can create furniture out of it. Or you deal with this kind of industrial waste, usually what we have and what we produce around us. It's a little bit the place which is far, far away. It's like the restaurant on the end of the universe from Douglas Adams. So what is there? And we said, okay, we try to do everything of the waste of the industrial, let's say, development. And one huge part is, of course, the car. You go there by car. And maybe we can also create furniture by cars. So the first thing was we create some chairs, very comfortable. You sit there, you drive there 3 hours, and then you sit again in this chair. That was also kind of irony. And then a second one was we have a collection, still we obsessed in preserving and learning from elements of this things to wash your hands, which is very minimal kind of water, so you find them in old industries. So they really have, in the old ancient time, they were very, let's say, precise in evaluating the use. And then also lamps and chairs, so everything was a little bit like a collection. And then also for the openings, for the huge windows, we find this nice detail what you have usually when you open your car backside, that you have this pressure, oil pressure things. So also they integrated together with our friend who has a steel manufacturing, and so we discussed the detail which is there. This just up to go in the higher level, there's a small top window, there's just the steel what you use there, and finally every time when you go there you have your high equipped sleeping bag to survive, and you really have to close it, and the wall has minus 10 degree, but it's still a place of nice accommodations. And you have to pick up the wood in the forest, and then you go there. And finally, this is a perception. You're really looking into the forest, and the view from the street side, it's really this kind of bunker which preserves the internal place. And also the doors, finally we decide we do the doors by concrete also, so they have a huge weight, and you also open them and like a safe, and then you enter in this huge panorama from the backside door with the view into the forest. This is a little bit breathing out view, but winter I think will also come soon. And maybe let's say again a small one to finish the lecture is again some of renovation, which I think it's in our European context, let's say it's also more than 50% of our work what we are doing, because we're confronted with a lot of architecture which is still around us, and we have to find strategies how to deal with them. Very often we have to convince the clients to keep the architecture, not to destroy it, and to find this kind of identity which a lot of buildings have. And I think more or less of every building you can do something. And there was a request in Berlin, they had that building, and they thought, okay, behind is the Berghain, which is the most well-known techno club, and there's a small long park, and they said, okay, we do like a cooperative park, so everybody can go there, can plant what you want, and we need a place, maybe we can meet people, each other, and we have a small administrator's office to explain the development of the quartier. But we have, I don't know, more or less no money to do that. and please can you create a project out of it. And then if you look very carefully in your personal collections of remarking things, how people usually start to impress small changements of buildings, they have really nice and easy campaigns to do that. So there's there are three colors for architects. There's black matte, black glossy, and black half glossy. Usually what we say, and this is a painting like in New York, London streets. When you walk there, you see facades. They're just monochromizing facades and keeping and working out the form, and they are quite impressive of that. And it's really a simple strategy to do that. So, and finally, we did this for the building. We said, okay, we just renovate a little bit the plaster, put some new windows in it, and then we paint everything in this monochrome color. And the difference in the color is only the different which material is behind. So that's a little bit this perception of it. And the ugly duck before, it gets a kind of diamond for the area. And that was everything finally. So we kept everything. We also made this discussion not to integrate insulation in it. So there's no water or something. And the supply is what you need for that. Because if you put a kind of use in it, you have to follow the Minergie or the eco standards. And he said, okay, everything what you need, like toilets and facilities and the office, we put in self-standing things outside. So we add finally 3 containers. There's also, let's say, a reference to the first project, what we did on the end. So we integrate the containers. So they had this kind of standard, and they solved our problems. And then in the last step, there was this discussion, still not realized, to put a huge carpet around, which unify the building. And finally, the inside it was the same, so it looked like that before, changing the windows and using a little bit color, and then you have another complete different kind of perception of the room. And today, that an artist wanted this room, and they gave it to them. There was also discussion about the traces, where we stopped to paint and where not. A little bit to leave this traces in that, and and it was a kind of exception also for the client. He was quite proud of it because he spent really 200,000 euro at the end for all of that, which is like the normal price for a small family house, and he get a, let's say, cooperative meeting place for that. So there are the additional parts around. You see the toilets, the office, what they had there, and you just play with this industrial prefabricated elements. That the container you have, which one can open on the side, and you have each window, and they're quite also interesting to define this kind of details. So that means sometimes designing architecture was really also really small steps. So it's not this huge. Let's say defining ideas and to rising up. If I don't know, I have to do everything new. It's also sometimes more or less small interventions what you can do, and that is maybe a thing to really to rethink carefully what is existing, what is there, and to deal with it, and then also to try to find a story behind that. And so I think that's our responsibility, and also that rising up now in our discussions, what we're also doing with the students and also in the office. Is this question of the moment we have since the last 5 years we have a rising up building industry, so everybody is proud. No, it's worse to study also architecture. When we start to study architecture, our parents get grey hairs. They said, oh God, no, it's a crisis and nobody builds. But what is interesting today, I think, is to a little bit to also be precise in this question of resources what we have, because this rising up industry to build everywhere is also the question what's the valuable material what we have. Sometimes decisions get felt only, okay, we do it with this type of window because I get it on the market. It's cheaper like this. And nobody asked for the long-term preview things. And also all elements what you're using today in building industry is the things that get glued together. You cannot dismantle them. So they're composed materials. We have a lot of, let's say, responsibility for that. And that is also a thinking which rises up a little bit in this, let's say, self-evaluating evaluation of the project, what you can do, and it's I think our responsibility also to convince the client to keep, let's say, architecture standing, not in the strong way to say it's a heritage building we cannot touch it, but to show a little bit that there's a perspective of this kind of reuse, also sometimes to take material, to take it somewhere else, and to keep this kind of value, and that makes the project also charming. Yeah, so I would say this would be the last image. Merci beaucoup pour votre oseille.
Okay, thank you very much. Does someone have maybe a question?
Merci. Bonsoir. Je voulais peut-être expliquer Je vais parler en français parce que mon anglais est très mauvais. Je voulais peut-être expliquer en anglais, je ne l'ai pas saisi dans votre exposé. Au départ, vous parlez de comment on traduit une idée à un client, comment on part de la même maison à un client, alors que lui, sa maison, elle n'est pas du tout la même que la nôtre. Et en fait, dans votre travail, vous êtes très radical, en tout cas, vous êtes très franc dans ce que vous proposez. Comment vous traduisez, comment on explique à un client qu'on va tout peindre en noir et que ce sera en accord avec le territoire dans lequel le site, le bâtiment à la base est inscrit.
Yeah. So first, I use that one, so you can. So first, of course, there's maybe we try to show that also in the exhibition a little bit. There's the question of how you visualize the things. So it's not that you make a perfect rendering and you say this will be your future. So first, you have a little bit to start this communication, this carefully listening what you want. Usually we use an image for the client. The first step, what is, maybe I take a look if I can find it. Usually it's a small image we use for communications with client. We say the project has to be developed in a sense to do it together. So you're not alone to face the decisions, and they have to be felt in a certain way together. That means it's a decision. It's a kind of decision making. No, not that. Which is important. So there's a nice image, let's say, of Alan Wexler. He made a nice art project, which are 4 people sitting together on a table. Everybody has a cup of coffee, and the cups of coffee are linked with a pipe system. And the thing is, if one raises the cup very fast up, the other one, they have hold the coffee of her jackets. So it means they're only successful with the coffee if they're lifting up the coffee in the same moment on the same level. So that is your responsibility as an architect, to try to and this is a kind of discussion and this process. It's not every time image. You know what I mean? So you have to convince on the one side the civil engineer to go with you. You have to convince the finance who has the money. You have to bring up the idea of what is responsible on a cultural way. And this is really, I think, you have to train to explain in this kind of projects. So you have one project you have a good Excel sheet. On another, you need, let's say, a timetable how to rise up to the end. And every time you have this kind of evaluation how to do that. And that's quite important. Usually it's not taught finally on schools because we are obsessed in designing that. But you can only be successful if you do that in a certain way about that. And we, for instance, we try to teach that if we're rising up more one-to-one projects, small one, that there's a part of the students, they have to care about materials, sponsoring, financing, communication in between. So that's the thing. Usually we explain success in architecture is a little bit like, easy for the Germans now, but they lost yesterday. It's like to compare it with football. That we say every team member every player of the team has a role. So you have one goalkeeper, 1 or 2 or 5 they shoot the goals. You have a medicine guy. You have the referees, and so they're also taking part in the game. So that is one thing. The second is, of course, we're still working very often with models. That means if you're going there, it's something which is touchable for the clients. They start to end on the project. They're sometimes not so precise, so we're not going with this prototyping accurateness. So to keep a little bit to keep the fogginess of the future thing that will arrive. And the last thing is to play also in this discussion with us to refer to something. And reference means not every time that we're coming up we say to a client, wow, this is the Mies National Gallery, because he is maybe a doctor, he don't know a Mies National Gallery, but you can say, we cut out of the building a little bit these pieces, we take it somewhere else, this big operation you did last week, and you add, I don't know, something else. So you have also to switch in this kind of language to this kind of communication with them. And still we have this to do it. It could be interesting also for us. because we go out every time with a kind of new knowledge for us. So we're not referring every time. That's why we're not very good in referring all of architects to say 20 books of HDM, EM2N, and of the colleagues. Usually it's better to buy a good book of art exhibition or just to travel around and to keep this kind of let's say, precise kind of communication. And that may be the different. Usually, what get taught by. You have this huge libraries of everything, and sometimes it's not very successful because only in competitions because all the colleagues they knew it looks like that, and that is a little bit two different ways you can enter in this kind of let's say keep an ongoing project to a successful end. And also you have to find the most project we do, they are let's say start with design and finish on the construction site. So we're not designing something and we give it away to a constructor. We usually also very close to the workers that do that. Because sometimes the worker also influences the project. So you have a design solution, you make drawings, and then you're not 2 weeks there, and then the client goes on the construction site and the worker says, oh, there, the architect, they offered the shitty thing here. And then the client is trusting more the guys on the working site. They say, oh, really? You think it's shitty? Yeah, that was my same opinion before. So you have also to find a good manner to communicate with them. So usually we have better tools in the office because we also build than the workers. So you can go there and you have this machine there. Oh, come on, this is a new one. And you're quite very close with it. And this is also a kind of passion, what you can keep, let's say, in architecture, which is also very interesting because you learn every time knowledge for the next project.
It's a long answer. I mean, what is the point maybe is really when the client comes, he usually has an idea in his mind already. It's mostly based on images and on numbers. And most of the clients also have a knowledge of ground plans. Because it's already like when you go to IKEA, you can design your own kitchen there, and the people they know what they want. What we think is the most important thing is if you want to do a radical project, not to show the final result, because this is mostly too radical for the client in the first place. So go small steps. And the second thing is to find a common ground, which is a little bit which is not so common. It's a common ground for communication, but it's not a common ground. So we're talking about small things that we found on the construction side, for example. In one example, for example, we took some huge strangely shaped element that we just found on the side. It was part of the old building. We said, look at this is quite beautiful. And what do you think? What does it mean? What was before? And this was questions the client didn't ask before. And so you come into communication on his project, on something which is related to his project, but you change the angle in a very smart way. I think this changing the angle is important.
There's another question?
You're afraid to get a long answer.
Yeah, maybe.
No, but the first thinking was.
Thank you. I also will speak in French, and maybe Yona will translate. Sorry. Par rapport à la couleur, vous utilisez souvent des couleurs très particulières, très mates. Et quelle est votre idée par rapport à la couleur? Si c'est pas un matériau, si vous utilisez une couleur, comment ça vient? Comment ça vous vient?
Les couleurs, c'est une histoire. No, it's French. The color, maybe it goes back to a project what we did, which was a restoration of a huge castle, and it was like that. So in a small city, which was quite very rich in the 11th century because they found a lot of gold, silver, not gold, silver, and there was a competition to restore this castle and to use it for a collection of minerals. That's a huge private collection of minerals, what they get. And the second of a depot for all literature about mining, what they had. And so also we went there, and the castle was an ancient Renaissance castle, which was reused by Napoleon for a corn depot. And so it was a very old corn depot, and also part of a very old Renaissance castle, and now they had to transform something. So we went there, and we were also tried to be passionate in that. So we started up very fascinated to go with them in the mines there, because they still exist. And this was incredible architectural, let's say, impression for us, because you were surrounded by monochrome, let's say, earth and ground, and it was, I don't know, 800 meters deep or 400, and it was hot. And then we were also visit this salt mines, and this is quite an impression, because it's also interesting. That way we learned a lot about techniques. So about the development, how they did everything in the ground was very related to the techniques, no? And so they had very small tunnels you had to rob by handmade, and so. And then we get this relationship to this kind of drues or minerals what they had in this collection. And for us it was incredible, because every mineral, we asked also the scientists, come on, this is not natural, you made this here in a CNC lab or something like that, because they're crazy. So, and then we rised up in this project to convince the client also for the building, to say, okay, if we start a little bit this perception of this monochrome colored room, they're a little bit like kind of protecting also an idea and to keep them together. And so for that project we did one of the magenta rooms, which was the entrance zone there, and there's another one which is the internal courtyard for the administration. And so they're working there on these documents, and we said, okay, when they go out of the document reading, get tired, and then they go in this courtyard, it's for them like to be in a great forest that rising up with oxygen. So we find a little bit this ways for them only in particular 3 places. So this was the first impression what we did. And then of course of an architect, you try also be, let's say, repetitive in that way, that you learn something and then you also develop it forward. And that's why it was a little bit on the school what you saw. This was a very easy step from this point, which was another project which was developed in the same period. That you said, okay, if a school is also, let's say, protecting the sun and the friendly situation for the children, it's not depends on the weather. It depends first on the teacher, of course, and then there's another sentence. It depends. The architecture is the 5th pedagogue or maître or maîtresse. We said, okay, maybe we can also integrate that, and so this color also rised up. So this were the colorful stories. The other colors usually we use in that way is that we really try to choose colors which are a little bit also has a kind of local, let's say, relationship again. So we never will do a pink house in the forest in that way if there's no reference. So it was only with this Lego reference, which was very clear in that color long before. And we said, okay, it's a clear reference is this kind of toys what you have. So this little bit color. It's not a passion, but it's every time it rises up in the discussion. And usually if you're not able to keep the kind of natural materialness, like there, the concrete or something, then we try to find our own story behind that kind of color.
For a long time we've been dealing with these monochrome spaces. Today in Germany it's complicated to go on with this idea, because it's mostly forbidden to do this, because there's issues of visibility. People don't see, like especially in schools, like the yellow school. I mean, this is today we cannot build it. So right now we have to invent new. We have to learn further, basically, to further develop this concept in a way. Because like technically there's borders or like issues today.
Last one for our last answer.
Oxygen.
Oh.
Oxygen.
Okay, so
Merci.
So we're done. And thank you for accepting the invitation.